Now, are you ready to enhance your communication skills and talents? The answers are yes or yes. Yes, our next speaker has 29 years of broadcast news and media communication experience. He has traveled extensively, covering a variety of stories, ranging from humanitarian efforts in Romania to refueling B-1 bombers over Canada en route to Bosnia. He currently hosts 2 business leadership podcasts and serves as the Chief Innovation Officer for the Better Business Bureau, Northwest and Pacific. And if that's not enough, he is also the award-winning author of Sweating Bullets, a story about overcoming the fear of public speaking. He's an Associated Press and Idaho Press Club winner, and if that's not enough, was named as an Idaho Business Review Accomplished Under 40 recipient and designated as a Better Business Bureau Integrity Counts honoree. Whew. If he's not working, you can find him riding his adventure motorcycle through the Pacific Northwest. Please join me in welcoming Dale Dixon.
Thank you. Thank you. People seize what they see, and there is no better way to help people seize a hold of something than story. We're going to spend a few minutes talking about how we've moved away from story, and my theory is that that's caused a little bit of tension in us, and when we're asked to tell a story, it feels a little awkward. So I go to my kids. We have a 17-year-old daughter and a 19-year-old son. And I remember distinctly reading to them, telling them stories when they were little. Fox in Socks by Dr. Seuss. If you can read that book and get through it without stumbling, bumbling, or mumbling, oh, you've made a big win. But when you do, it makes the kids laugh. So it was a win either way. And I watched our kids enter into school, and then middle school and high school. And as they made that progression, they got further and further away from story and more interested in facts and figures and studying for the test. Then they get to college, and then they enter the workforce, where we give up story for spreadsheets. We give up story for data. We give up story for PowerPoint slides with graphs and charts. I see it professionally. I'm often asked in my role with Better Business Bureau to step in and interview candidates as we're hiring throughout the Pacific Northwest. And I love to use the behavioral interview style, where we'll sit down and we'll ask a question like, tell me about a specific time in your life when you had a difficult customer. What happened, and how did you work through that? The idea being, if we can see how they behaved during that specific time, it'll give us a clue as to how they'll behave in the future when presented with challenges. Most of the time, as I ask that type of question, the candidate immediately goes to generalization mode. Oh, lots of difficult customers. I do A, B, C, X, Y, Z. And I have to dig deep and ask more questions to get them to actually tell me that story. So we move from this process of being kids and loving story through the evolution of moving away from story in school into the workplace. And it makes life difficult for us to go back and tap in and actually tell a story. So my theory is we've moved away from it, and if we are presented the opportunity to tell a story, because we're not practiced, we tend to get a little anxious about it. There's some tension inside, and it can feel awkward. How do we get past that? That was my challenge for today. So I decided I would approach this like a journalist, because that's a majority of my background. And I started calling up your colleagues. Most of you are in the room today, so I hope I get these stories right. My first phone call was to Connie Miller. I can see Connie right here, even in the bright lights. When I called Connie up and I said, Connie, I'm going to be at the MAXX Conference. My job is to help people get past the tension and the anxiety of telling stories. Help me out. She immediately launched into a story to illustrate the passion that each and every one of you have for the work that you do day in and day out. I mingled in the front lobby area as you were checking in. I spent some time in this area. It's palpable how you love what you do. And Connie just launched right into the story. There's a person in our community who called Connie. She was at her financial rock bottom when she contacted Connie, looking for help, asking for Connie's help. Connie said she'd never seen a credit score so low. 408. After Connie accepted the invitation to help, Connie found out that the woman had actually defaulted on a loan with Icon Credit Union, where, by the way, I'm a member. That was the challenge. And Connie said she committed to work through the struggle. That struggle being setting up a budget, putting a plan in place. And then Connie committed to be part of the resolution. And that resolution is a weekly check-in, as Connie is her accountability partner. I just checked in with Connie right before we started today. The woman is making tremendous progress. She's getting married. She actually paid off that loan with Icon Credit Union. That's an example of what you're all about. And Connie had that story ready to go. I also talked to Jeff Adams, who's the CEO at Horizon Credit Union. And he really brought to mind that we can't rely on the Connies of the world, that we all have to participate in story and advocating for credit unions. It takes everyone. Jeff told me, he said, we all need to be involved and invested at a greater depth. He said, the lawmakers see the same faces over and over and over again, but when they need to see some new faces. And when they do see the new faces, that they know there is a groundswell of people behind the credit union effort. And that's so important. I loved what Amy Nelson with Point West told me. She said, data is important. She said, member stories are important. Marry the two and you have impact in action. I loved that. Oh, I lit up when I heard her say, impact in action. Now, I know what you're saying. You're saying, okay, Dale, that's great. You've given us some personal examples, some professional examples. You've talked about our colleagues and the importance of story. But we're in the finance business with our members, and I need some data. I need some facts and figures to know that this idea of storytelling is really what I need to be spending my time on. So just go out and take a look at some of the research, specifically the Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience and the Harvard Business Review. Both wrote about studies. Now you remember as I told you the story of Connie and the woman that she's mentoring, I laid it out as challenge, struggle, and resolution. Those are the three key pieces of the framework for a great story. So the first step in getting past the awkwardness of telling stories is to realize it's as simple as challenge, struggle, resolution. As the Harvard Business Review and the Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience went through the research and explained what was going on, they were actually able to see a physiological change in people as they experienced story. Oxytocin started flowing through their bloodstream. That's the feel-good drug. They saw it happen when you had the framework of challenge, struggle, resolution matched with a character that the listener of the story could relate to. That's what created that physiological change. So, data is important. Member stories are important, but marry the two for absolute impact. And then, of course, Amy had to tell me the story that illustrates that point so beautifully. She had Todd Harper, who is an NCUA board member, I believe, in their credit union. And they have an amazing story if you haven't seen it yet. An entrepreneur was trying to make her, an entrepreneur in the making, I should say, was trying to make her way to her job, got stuck on a bus and didn't make it into her work, and basically threw up her hands and said, something has to change. She went to her credit union and said, I have a dream to start a business, but I don't have any resources. The credit union made something happen. 10 years later, we have Sarah's Tamales. Sarah's Tamales has made it possible for Sarah to employ her family, to pay off a house, to buy cars, to really have an impact in the community. So the folks at Point West told Todd Harper this story. 1 week later, Todd was in Governor Kate Brown's office in Oregon, and he told her the story. It actually brought tears to the governor's eyes. That is the power of story, word of mouth, impact in action. It's what you're doing day in and day out. I ran into Mary Vasquez as she was getting on the elevator. Mary, I think I saw you sit down somewhere out in the center. Mary, stand up. Mary wrote the $500 loan that put Sarah's Tamales into business. We need to give Mary a round of applause for making that story happen. So I told you I was looking at this from a journalistic standpoint. As I talked to a number of you, it became clear that there are really three key areas in getting to a place where storytelling can be more comfortable for us. So first is just recognizing the power of story, realizing that there's evidence there, both anecdotal and scientific. Number two on the list is habit. And I arrived at this one in a rather unique way. I was asked to do a similar TED-style presentation on gratitude. And as I dug in and I did the research on gratitude, it became abundantly clear that it is amazingly powerful in our lives. A whole nother TED Talk. But I went home and I thought, how do I get my family to grab a hold of this idea of gratitude? And I came up with the idea of we're going to have a gratitude conversation around the dinner table every night. So each night, each person in the family is expected to show up and say one thing, at least one thing that they're grateful for from that day. I thought, okay, I have to practice what I preach, especially around this idea of storytelling. I'm going to step up my game, and I'm going to show up every night with a story. So I have to be watching throughout the day for a story that illustrates my gratitude for the day. That's how we start to make a habit of storytelling. When we do something like that, mentally be intentional, it triggers this thing called reticular activation. What the heck is reticular activation? Anybody heard of it? So the best way to explain it is you go and you buy a car. You think, oh, I have a unique make, model, color, some different things on the car, and you drive off the car lot and you get to that first intersection and you're stopped at the stoplight and you look across and there's the exact same car staring back at you. That's reticular activation, because before, your brain was filtering out all of those cars around you. So the first time you saw it, you thought, oh, that's unique, I'll buy that one. But now your brain is activated to this car, this model, this make, this color, and so it is open. You've opened the filter. And we have to open our brain's filters to what's going on around us in these specific areas about looking for story. As I talked to Samantha Beeler, who works for your association, I asked her, what are some of the big struggles you see in making story a habit? She said, number one, we have the humility hurdle. People don't like to talk about religion. People don't like to talk about politics, or shouldn't talk about politics. And people don't like to talk about money. And so we have to get past this idea that we can't talk about the good work we're doing because it's connected to money. There are ways to tap in and share those specific stories. Hopefully, I've already given you examples, and there are more examples to come. She said, another thing is we see the C-suite get so busy in the day-to-day operations that they miss out on the member stories. We see this in every industry. You were told I host a podcast with Jason Jennings, has 8 books on the New York Times bestseller list, speaks around the world, just got home from India, and a research team. And that research team looks at what makes long-standing businesses successful. They found that leadership that purposefully, intentionally gets its hands dirty, and when I say get its hands dirty, that means going out and talking to, in the business world, their customers, their clients. In your world, it's talking to your members. But it's important to go out and look for stories and then be able to tell the stories. Gene Pelham with Rogue Credit Union is in the audience. I asked Gene about going back to the early days, what caused some fear for him. And he said it was just the idea of going to the State House. He said he vividly remembers his first trip to Salem and his CEO putting his arm around him and saying, "These are real people." Those few simple words were all it took. And Gene said that was the realization, a huge realization, that these are real people and they want to hear what I have to say. It is. It's real people wanting to hear what you have to say because you all represent incredibly powerful stories, but it's about creating the habit of doing it day in and day out. So I asked Amy Nelson once again, I said, so how do you know that you're doing it enough? That you're advocating enough? She said, when you walk up to your legislator and they say, Amy, you got a haircut, that's when you're doing it enough. Next on our list, know your why. Why are you doing this? And this was what was so fun about the conversations I had leading up to our time together today, is because you are so tapped into your why of credit unions. Scott Atkins with Gisa Credit Union, he's an executive there, said, what we stand for is just as important as our rates. It's about serving our members. It was the story that Gene Pelham told me, though, that just put the bow on the present, the gift. Gene was in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill meeting with his congressional delegation. He had a meeting with his congressman, Greg Walden, and had a great conversation, left Congressman Walden's office and went to the airport. He's sitting there at the gate waiting for his flight, and lo and behold, who walks up to the gate but Congressman Walden? They get on that same plane. They make that incredibly long flight from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast. It's late at night. Gene goes home. He's got an early morning. He has a business breakfast he has to be at. So Gene gets up early in the morning and musters the energy, goes to the business breakfast, and who's there? Bright, shiny? Congressman Walden. Gene goes about his day, has a business lunch, goes to the business lunch, sits down at the table. Who comes up and sits next to Gene? Congressman Walden. Same high energy, fully engaged. And Gene said he's sitting there in awe. He's tried to keep up for 24 hours. This is a way of life for Congressman Walden. So Gene said, I leaned over and I asked Congressman Walden, I said, how do you do it? I've just done this for 24 hours. I'm exhausted. How do you do this day after day? Congressman Walden said, if I think about how, I can't. He said, but when I think about the why, I can. Naturally, I had to ask Gene, so what's your why? Gene said, he said, I grew up in a tough environment, but a lot of people looked out for him along the way. And he said his work at the credit union is a way to repay those who helped by making others' lives better. You each have your personal why. It's there in his story. You're going to learn in our next presentation how to craft that story. But I'm convinced when you understand the power of story, You match that with making a habit of looking for and telling stories on a daily basis, matched with your why, that it'll get easier. It's not going to be easy to begin with, but it'll get easier day after day as we practice this important advocacy tool of storytelling and what it means for you in your communities. Because people sees what they see. And they see something different in you because of the work you do in the communities you serve, day in and day out. But remember, the most important story that you tell is the story you tell yourself. Make it a great one. Thank you.